Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share insights on what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumey, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the CEO of Rolling Suds, Aaron Harper. Aaron, how are you?
I'm great, Frank. I'm excited to be here with you today and talk about emerging brands.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm looking forward to having you on.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this with you. It was great to meet you, and I'm glad we get to know each other better today.
Yeah. So I met you for the first time at Springboard back in September 2023 and heard you speak. Yep. And after I saw you, I went up to you, I gave you my card. I said, look, I'd love to have you on my podcast. I think my show had just been launched. I think we were like a few weeks old by then.
Yeah, totally.
So you have done obviously a great job in franchising. You are an emerging brand, but you're not new to franchising. You know, Aaron, you've done a tremendous job in another aspect that a lot of founders have not put enough value in, and that is in personal branding. Because I see you everywhere, right? You speak at Springboard, you spoke at Emerging Franchisor Conference, you're all over LinkedIn, you're on a bunch of podcasts. I think you've done a great job and really a service, not just to Rolling Suds, but for yourself and how you expand your brand. And I look back at your history and I'm like, all right, we got a Hollywood guy here. So maybe that's the genesis of it. So I want the audience to learn more about you.
Okay.
So Let's go back before franchising. So what led you, what were you doing before you got into franchising? And I want to hear a little bit more about this Hollywood background.
Yeah, sure. So have you ever seen the show Entourage?
Yeah.
So I thought I wanted to be Ari Gold, except maybe just a little bit more measured in the film and television industry. I thought I wanted to be a talent agent.
Right.
So I went to film school. I grew up in Southern California, and I went to film school at UC Santa Barbara. And I graduated, and I went straight down to Hollywood to work in the mailroom of a talent agency. In Hollywood, like, no matter whether you want to be a producer or an agent or a director, like, you start at a talent agency because nothing can happen without the talent agency. That's where you meet all the people. I did that and kind of rose up the ranks pretty quickly and was on track to be kind of an agent. And it takes between 5 to 7 years or so of like training to become an agent. And not everyone makes it. I worked for partners. What I learned is that the only people who are more high maintenance, let's just say, than the actors is the agents and managers that represent them.
Okay.
And so my job, my job was managing, basically, like, I was the liaison between the agents and the actors. Like, I was effectively the manager of their business.
Okay.
And that's how you learn kind of like how deals work and all that kind of stuff. And about 5 years in, I was like, wait a minute, I don't want to be anything like any of the people I'm working for.
Okay.
And so, if I'm working every single day, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, and I don't want what person I'm working for has, I really need to think about what I'm doing. And so I switched and I got into music. I liked music more. I was on the kind of management side of a record label, helping to build a division in music, but still working around like creatives. And I really love working like with creative people. I believe that like I can bring out more creativity from people that's kind of like a skill set I feel like I have. But there was no long-term track for me there unless I like hit it big with like the next actor or writer, or in that case, musician. And I started calling around different people, and a buddy of mine worked in franchising. He's like, you need to be making more money. And I'm like, I'm listening. And he's like, you should get into franchise development. And I thought what a lot of the other people think that are outside franchising is like, what do you mean? Like, right. It goes, what, McDonald's? Like, what do you mean? And he told me that like, no, he works for an established carpet cleaning concept, but people can basically buy a business for under $250,000 and be an entrepreneur or be a business owner. That was really interesting to me. Now, his boss didn't have any job openings, but he made the mistake of giving me his email. And I emailed his boss every 3 weeks for 6 months until he hired me. And so that was kind of the genesis of it. So on the franchise masters thing I was on, I jumped from Hollywood to carpet cleaning
Of course,
as
why
a
not? What
tactile.
look,
Yeah,
everybody else jumps from something that has nothing to do with franchising into franchising.
right.
So
Yeah.
you go into ChemDry. Now, ChemDry is a well-established franchisor, and you're part of, I imagine, a team of franchise development people, right? So you're selling
Yep.
franchises among how big is probably the team then? They have like 4 or 5 people then,
At the
or
time, they had three different franchise developers.
okay,
I believe I was the fourth, and then one left. So they teetered anywhere from 2 to 4 franchise directors per year.
right? Okay, so this is like 2017. So what do you think when you get into franchising? You know nothing about selling franchises.
So it took a really long time. Like anyone who starts in franchise development, like it takes a long time to start like figuring things out, and like it's a different kind of sale, I would say. Like there's a recruiting element, there's consulting,
Mhm.
there's all these pieces that are kind of like hard to put a finger on. The benefit that I had is I went from an industry where like every single person was like hard to please, like almost impossible to please, to like this part where I get to provide this opportunity where someone could start a business, but had to really figure out the nuance of that. There were these very like structured ways to do things. And so that's what I was taught. Like you do this, you get them to a webinar, you do the webinar, you go to this, you go to this step, you go to this step. And it was a great learning experience. But what I learned over the years is that the process that you do for franchise development needs to be unique to the buyer, even though there's stuff that you do every single time. Like it needs to adapt to the type of buyer that you're talking
Mhm.
to make that more of a meaningful experience. And that was very like the process there was very cookie cutter. It was very like if they have this amount of capital, when you get them to this stage, they can kind of sign up and it was fine. There were a lot of things I thought that should have been different, honestly, but it's a 40-year-old brand. And so who am I? I just came from Hollywood. Like, I don't know what franchising is.
Right.
But yeah, so I learned a lot. And then I jumped from that to an emerging brand after that.
Mhm.
So,
So I love that you started in franchise development because that's the heart of the matter. Of course, we know that unit economics is most important, but if you're going to start in franchising, to hear personally what buyers are saying, what are they questioning, what are their fears, what are their hopes and dreams, what is the franchise itself, what the franchise offering is, and what does the franchise agreement look like. To start in franchising and franchise development, I think gave you a huge advantage.
absolutely. I know every single call I have with a buyer, I know exactly what they need. And so
Mm-hmm.
to be able to reverse engineer from there and say, okay, I'm going to build a brand. I know exactly what franchisees need and what their concerns are because I meet them when they're not a business owner.
Right.
And I've seen the life cycle of like franchisees that have been in a year, 2 years, 3 years, how their business grows. And so to build that, to be able to build it from that point into being an emerging franchisor is definitely does give me a leg up, I believe.
Yeah. So, okay. So then you go to the Belfour Franchise Group. Who are they? I'm not familiar with the name.
So Belfour Corporate is the biggest restoration company in the world. So
Okay.
they do like large scale disaster relief. They rebuilt the Notre Dame Cathedral in France. They cleaned the Princess cruise ship for COVID. So like they restore like stadiums. They'll rebuild cities after hurricanes and tornadoes hit. So they had a franchise division called Belfour Franchise Group, and they had three brands at the time. So a water damage brand, a duct cleaning brand, and a commercial hood cleaning brand.
Okay.
They wanted to build to a multi-brand like platform company. So they bought us and they put us in charge of their franchise division. So my leadership team stepped in and then they said they wanted to scale. And so my boss, the COO of the company, found a brand called Patch Boys, which they acquired from an emerging franchisor. They bought the business in COVID in June of 2020, and it was an emerging franchise brand
Mm-hmm.
that was about 4 years old, and it had 100 units sold, 40 franchisees. The founder exited, and my boss asked me if I would come in and help run the brand and do franchise development, but also kind of help influence the infrastructure of the brand. And so that was kind of the switch from ChemDry over to the Patch Boys, which is a drywall repair concept.
This
We
is
were
a
first
huge.
to,
This is a huge step up for you personally.
yeah,
Going from franchise development now to being involved in a leadership position in growing a brand.
it was a big step up. I went from franchise director to like senior franchise development director, but really I wore a lot of hats because I was effectively the first full-time employee
Mhm.
on that business because there was no management team in place. There wasn't really any systems. And so me and a brand president were basically the first full-time employees. We had to walk back a lot of kind of like improper expectations that were set by the founder and really essentially build a franchise system. We needed to do a rebrand or like a brand refresh. There was no item 19, there was no software, there was no lead gen structure in place. Like it was all essentially we built it from scratch. Well, negative scratch because we had
Right.
we had to work backwards. It was a tremendous experience. And what I learned from that, I mean, I learned a ton, but what I learned from that is the brand president and me, which was getting the brand ready to sell, and the brand president, like we were talking every day, like 4, 5, 6 times a day, because him and I, like, and so we developed this like incredible amount of trust with each other. And he knew that I cared deeply about the success of the franchisees that were existing, but also the ones we brought in. And I knew that he was working tirelessly to make sure that systems were being built for franchisees.
Nice.
And so what you find in the franchising industry is there's this disconnect between operations and sales. And what ends up happening, and sometimes it's like by design, because you have a franchise sales organization that is literally not part of the operations team at all. What I learned is basically if sales and operations don't talk to each other, and they're not aligned on what needs to happen to grow the franchise, then franchisees suffer. Those two different departments have to adapt to the changes of the brand.
Right. Right. And that's why
And
if
they can't adapt unless they're talking.
sure, and that's why if you're a franchisor that's using an outside franchise sales organization, it takes even a more concerted effort of the leadership team of the franchise organization to making sure that that FSO is integrated as much with the culture and with operations as possible. If there's a disconnect there, they're just selling franchises away, and operations just feels like they're the recipient of these franchisees.
Correct. And they have to kind of essentially clean up the mess of franchise development. So I talk a lot about responsible franchising, and like it truly begins in the franchise development process and setting the proper expectations. And like with Rolling Suds, we've now turned away 33 people in the franchise development process that weren't right, which we do 2 to 3 territories per buyer. So that's potentially 100 units that we turn down. But it's because I'm all about putting the right people in the right seats. I know who's going to be successful in my system and I know who's not.
Right. Okay. So you're at Belfour, and there's this 33-year-old company that hasn't franchised called Rolling Suds. How do you find them? And what inspired you to say, you know what? I want to own a brand. I'm going to do this
Yeah.
now. Bring me to the whole thing on how you found these guys or how they found you.
Yeah, sure. So the middle of last year, so the middle of 2022, we had grown Belfour Franchise Group from 3 brands to 12. When I left, there was only one platform organization in the services space that was larger than us from a unit count perspective. And we had also grown Patch Boys from where it was, which was no systems, to 323 units. And I did that in 24 months. And all those locations opened, and they opened with full-time labor hired prior to going to training, and they opened with estimates on the calendar upon leaving training. During that time, I was being asked by places like Springboard or FLDC or some of these conferences to participate on a thought leadership level on panels and discussions about how to properly franchise a business. And so I went to a conference in 2022 in July, FranServe conference. I'm very close with the team over there at FranServe and spoke on the expert panel. Joan Winchester, I'm not sure if you know Joan, but she came up to me afterwards and she's like, I had an aha moment. I'm like, what's up? She's like, you need to own your own brand. You need to go and you need to start your own business. You need to buy a brand. Like, I don't care. You need to own it. And I was like, I had already known I was going to go start a business. I
Okay.
didn't know it was going to be something that was filling a void in franchising. And I had ideas, but I didn't know which one was. And I kind of like didn't see fully the path to get there. I had that. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And started building infrastructure then that I could plug into any concept based on anything I learned, marketing programs, SOPs, like supplier relationships, all that. And then in September, I met founders of Rolling Suds. I had looked from July to September at about 24 businesses, ranging anywhere from 750,000 top line to 14 million in the residential and commercial services space.
Okay.
Met the founders of Rolling Suds in September of 2022 at Springboard. And they were like, we're good at power washing, not franchising. And I was like, great. I know nothing about power washing, but I know a lot about franchising.
So they were
And they were
thinking of franchising then at this point.
So they had gotten an FDD.
Okay.
They had gotten an FDD, realized how much capital and time it would take to actually franchise, and realized, wait a minute, this is going to take away from the business that I know how to run really well. And my business that I know how to run really well is going to suffer. And I might spend all this money on franchising and I might only get 2 to 3 owners, right? Which I think is really impressive that they recognize that it's a completely different business and decided, wait a minute, I don't know how to do this. Why don't I partner with a franchisor? And why don't I just keep running my business and the franchisor partner with the franchisor in the franchise business?
Really smart.
Really smart. They're just great people. And I had a really clear checklist of what I was looking for. Like there was bullet pointed. I knew exactly what I was looking for in a business, and Rolling Suds checked all the boxes.
What were some of the, I want to hear, what were some of the most important aspects of a business that were going to check those boxes?
Yeah, sure. So, and this is just based on my experience. So I needed something that was need-based, niche. I don't want a business that has a long, complex list of service offerings. They're hard to scale. I think from a consumer standpoint, consumers like to hire a company that does one thing and does it really well. Something that was recession resistant that I either felt had the ability to go through hard times, or in the best case scenario had gone through hard times, right? This is a 33-year-old business. Something that was at a large total addressable market. So a lot of customers, so both residential and commercial. Unskilled labor was a non-negotiable for me. You know, I think that when you have skilled labor, you just have there's a certain lack of control on the business, because if you can't train someone to do the job, you're beholden to certain employees or certain licenses based on the business. So that was, non-negotiable for me. There were 2 things on my list that were nice to haves and not need to haves, because they're really hard to find when you're analyzing opportunities. But the first one is like a difference in product offering. So a product that is essentially better objectively than the rest of the industry, right? So think like an iPhone in 2007, like before that, it was the BlackBerry and the Motorola Razr and the Nokia brick phone. And that was like as advanced as it was.
Right.
The iPhone came out and like completely disrupted the industry, and people have been trying to catch up with it for decades now. So with Rolling Suds, like we do a 3,000 square foot house in 25 minutes, start to finish. Like set up, tear down, everything. Charge the customer $400 or $500. And no one else can do that. We're the only power washing company in the world that can do that. We built the equipment ourselves. We have a proprietary kind of technology and process that we do that you can't get unless you're a Rolling Suds franchisee. So if you have a difference in product offering, it's a lot easier to disrupt an industry. The other thing that I was looking for that was a nice to have, but not a need to have, was little to no competition in the franchise space. So the best example of this would be like 1-800-GOT-JUNK in the 90s. The junk business was just a dude who had a car and put junk in it. And then 1-800-GOT-JUNK came in and had a wrapped vehicle, and they answered the phone and they showed up on time, and they built this billion-dollar company because they were the first sophisticated operators in the franchise space. They've since paved the way for college hunks hauling junk, Junk King, Junk Luggers, and some of these brands you can't get territory now for if you tried.
Sure.
And so there's no niche power washing franchise brand that has any level of relevance. There are exterior cleaning companies that do gutters and windows and all of these other services, but there's no franchise brand that just does power washing. And so I saw an opportunity to be the first sophisticated operator in an industry and kind of reset standards. I say reset, but set standards, because the majority of the industry are people that do the power washing currently. So, and the reason why those were nice to haves but not need to haves is, I'm sure you're understanding, they're hard to find in a business. But also I had both of those things with the last businesses I worked on. ChemDry had a proprietary technology and process that no one's been able to touch for over 40 years. No one touched it, and they're still the biggest. And then Patch Boys, we were first to market in the drywall repair space on the franchise side. And there's like 6 or 7 other patching franchises that have come out, trying to kind of ride the tidal wave that we created there. And so with Rolling Suds, I was able to find both of those things, and it's a simple business model, and it just made a ton of sense. So does that answer your question, or was there something else you wanted me?
Yeah, no, that's great. That is great. And so Rolling Suds now, so you acquired the franchise rights to the business. So the
Yep.
original founders are still running their company owned location.
Yep. And they're involved in the franchise business as well. So they're partners of mine in the franchise business. They continue to own and operate and grow their corporate location. But me and them are the two biggest shareholders in the company for the franchise entity. And so we partnered. I raised capital from people like David Barr and Brad Fishman, who you know.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted people who had kind of like long-term experience that could provide intellectual capital in addition to actual capital. We just finalized another transaction. David asked me if he could get more involved from a financial and an equity standpoint. I said, you sure can. Kind of built a really incredible board of advisors for this. We finalized everything in January of this year and started franchising in February.
Wow. Aaron, you built such a strong foundation for your business. That congratulations. That's
Thank
fantastic.
you.
So, you were telling me earlier before we started, so you have 22 franchisees currently in 64 territories. And what you do that's a little bit different than most of the emerging franchise founders that I talk to is that you require a minimum of 2 franchise territories, right, per franchisee, and
Right.
because you're looking for strictly multi-unit franchise owners. Would you share with the audience why multi-unit franchise owners is the only kind of candidate you're looking for?
Yeah, so there's a very different thought process between a single unit owner and a multi-unit owner. A single unit owner is often looking to take a salary from maybe one truck. They don't have as much desire to scale. There's just a psychology around buying one territory that just isn't going to work with how big we want to grow. There's nothing wrong with single unit owners, just to be clear. But what I am looking to accomplish with Rolling Suds is building a massive business. We have an opportunity to build the biggest power washing company in the world. We'll do that probably by the end of next year from a revenue standpoint. We'll be the biggest power washing franchise in the world by March, just in terms of unit counts. And then that's a year in, right? So like we have this opportunity to build something extraordinary. So we need people who have really big goals, franchisees who have really big goals to come in and help us get there. And I believe I've built the infrastructure to support those types of franchisees. And the only thing I believe right now that would get in the way of us becoming the biggest power washing company in the world is bringing in franchisees who don't have the wherewithal, whether it's from a capital or a goal standpoint, to grow at the same rate that the organization is growing.
Right. So you're looking for a more sophisticated franchise owner that obviously has the financial wherewithal and understands it's not owner operated. They get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like initially with any business, you're going to learn how the cogs work. You're going to learn how to manipulate the P&L. You're going to learn how to train people.
Right.
You're going to learn how to be effectively the general manager. But then what I like to call, you're going to fire yourself the roles. And in order to do that, you have to be able to delegate and remove yourself from certain situations. And we're looking for people who want to build assets, not jobs.
Mm.
And so I brought on a business coach. He's a former multi-unit Dunkin' Donuts franchisee. He had 8 locations and exited. And my guidance to him is, listen, I want you to help every franchisee that comes in to understand that they're a multi-unit owner and help them think like a multi-unit owner. With a multi-unit owner, it's less about salary and it's more about enterprise value. There's these thought processes that we are trying to instill upon franchisees because we want franchisees that want to build a multi-million dollar business. And that is not fathomable for a lot of single unit owners.
Yeah, no question about it. So in order for you to grow, how many franchises do you anticipate 12 months from now?
We'll have about 180 units 12 months from now.
So I'm sure some people listening to this wondering, okay, are these guys using brokers and an FSO? Like, how are they going to get there? So are you using brokers to help sell franchises? Are you using an FSO? Is it something you'd recommend?
I have a lot of thoughts here. We do it in-house. So we do franchise development in-house.
Okay.
I currently do it. I have a team of 13 people, including me and the founders. I've hired people who are better than I am at operations. I have a one-on-one with each member of my executive team each week. And other than that, I'm vetting the franchisees that are coming in and handling the franchise development in-house because at this stage of a franchise, setting the proper expectations and bringing in the right people allows us to build the building blocks of a system because I'm looking at if I'm bringing someone in now, 2 years from now, who is the guy 2 years from now going to want to talk to in order for him or her to come into the business, right? What is the acumen of that person? So we do use consultants, brokers, however you want to refer to it. However, I work with like a very specific set of consultants. I pretty much do all of my deals with one network. And we find franchisees, and I work with brokers who I believe in responsible franchising, like to set the proper expectations and put candidates in front of me because they know they're going to be taken care of and treated well throughout the process and truly set up for success. But no, I do not use an FSO.
Aaron, I know it's not very popular, but you and I have in common is that we started in franchise development. Even though I founded my company, I actually liked selling the franchises myself early on. And I know not everybody that's maybe an emerging founder can do it, nor should they be the one to do it. Having a sales background is obviously really important. You can't teach somebody to do sales. You're either a salesperson,
Right.
you are, or you're not, right? But what I enjoyed about being in franchise development early on and for a few years is that I loved hearing what the candidates were saying. I felt like I needed
Right.
to know. And it's different than hearing it from somebody else that's saying, oh, here's what I'm hearing. Like I just rolling up my sleeves and being involved in Fran Dev. It was very enjoyable.
Yeah, and this won't be the case forever.
No.
We're already looking at what it's going to be like in the next 6 months, but like by March, we'll have 100 units, maybe sooner than that.
Yeah.
It's time for me to kind of step out of that role. But we will always do franchise development in-house. I believe that the franchise development experience for the buyer, for the franchisee, sets the stage for what they can expect culturally as they go into the business. And if that experience doesn't match up with actually what the ethos of the company is and what that franchisee is going to experience after they sign, you run the risk of franchisees being unhappy and, potential failures, right? It is hard to do that when you're outsourcing the sales to an organization that inherently does not have the same ethos as the business that you're running because they have their own culture and community and that. And so blending those two things and then setting the franchisees up with the right expectations just becomes a lot more challenging. Now, I understand that not everyone can do what you or I do from a franchise development standpoint, but I'm doing it in-house and will forever.
Yeah. I'm not surprised that a guy with a Fran Dev background is going to continue to do it in-house. And it makes sense for you, but just for everybody else that's out there that maybe does not have the Fran Dev experience or is much more operationally, that's their thing. Using an FSO, there's nothing wrong with it. You just have to make sure that they are breathing, eating, drinking, sleeping your culture, right? And
Yes.
integrate them as much as possible. So let's talk a little bit more about Rolling Suds then. So you talked about how this company, you are primed to be the largest company, of course, that does the pressure power washing. You're in 18 states right now. Are you guys thinking beyond the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, eventually go to Canada first kind of thing. I've already probably get one person from Canada reaching out to me once every week or two.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get our systems down in the US, get into as many major markets as possible, and help franchisees get to multiple trucks as quickly as possible. And then, probably look at Canada and then probably master licenses from there. But yeah, I mean, I feel like we have this killer opportunity to become the category leader in power washing. And you don't get that opportunity very often to grow the biggest of something in the world, right? And so we're going to do it, and we're just going to keep doing what we've been doing and building systems now to support what we need 3 years from now and continue to take the capital that we have and we are given from franchisees and invest it back into the infrastructure of the business.
Cool. What's the biggest challenge you guys are facing as you have this enormous growth potential and goals?
I would say, and this is going to be any franchisor that scales at a similar rate that we're scaling, is making sure that there are suppliers that not only can keep with the level of support that we expect for franchisees, but are also willing to invest into their own business to support franchisees, right? And everyone wants to say that at the beginning, right? Because we are a big account for a supplier. And for anyone who's listening, a supplier would be like a vendor, right? Someone who provides services to franchisees in our case. But when it comes down to it, and we add 10 units per month, then and when I say 10 units, I mean actual 10 franchisees per month, and we open 10 franchisees in a month. We need vendors who can keep up and that their systems don't break, because I'm confident that our internal systems have been built in a way that we can handle it. And so just selecting the right suppliers and making sure that they stay in line with our ethos and our brand standards and our experience that we're providing for franchisees. But yeah, I mean, we're doing really well though.
That's great. What about your vision? Does it go beyond Rolling Suds? Are we looking at a platform down the road?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm going to do is continue to add value to Rolling Suds franchisees. And eventually that will be creating another brand that I can then bring to Rolling Suds franchisees that they can increase the enterprise value of their business before I bring that brand to the general market. It'll fall within the same buy box that I have with Rolling Suds. It'll have the same kind of checks boxes that I'm trying to check. And we'll probably do that in the next, I don't know, 2 to 3 years. But my focus is finding the right franchisees, getting those franchisees open, helping them get to multiple trucks. Finding the right franchisees, getting them open, helping them get to multiple trucks, and helping them achieve their why in the process, which I talk a lot about that. We actually have a why call. And so my operations team sits down with the franchisee and their spouse or whomever is going to be involved in the business. And we just tell them, tell us why. Why are they doing this? Why are they going to stay up till 1 a.m. worried about payroll sometimes? Like, why are they going to do that? And then my coaching and my everything that we do, we have their why in their folder. And we come back to it regularly because helping people achieve their why is what, to me, what success looks like for Rolling Suds. It's not like this number of units or this AUV or this revenue per the system. Like all of those things are important, but franchisees have different goals. Some people want to build generational wealth. Some people want to pass something down to their kids. Some people want to exit in 3 years and buy another business. And so I think it's our job to help franchisees achieve those things.
Sure. And I've noticed with franchise owners, they all have different objectives. Like you said, some people think, well, I'm going to sell it to give it to my kids one day, and they may find that their kids don't want it.
Right.
Or, they want to sell it one day. But at the end of the day, you mentioned this earlier that I don't hear enough franchisors talk about, and that is building enterprise value. That's essentially what you're trying to do in helping the franchisees growing their business.
Yeah. And I mean, when I'm doing franchise development now, like I'm talking to someone and I'm like, listen, they're like, how much can I expect in income year one? And it's like, well, first of all, I don't have that data. We launched in February and I'm not just going to make up a number. But second of all, like you don't want to squeeze a margin out of one truck so you can make $80,000 a year. Like, why would you buy a business? Just go work somewhere else and continue to make 200 grand.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to build a business that has value that you can eventually sell, or you can step away from and have that business continue to produce income for you. So you can go start another business. And I don't feel like a lot of franchisors, and I could be wrong, try to help people build enterprise value. What I've found in my experience in franchising is a lot of franchisees leave a job where they're making $150,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
They go buy a business and then they work that business as it's a job for another 2 to 4 years. And then they're burnt out because they have another job. And then they try to sell that business, but they can't because it's a job and it's nothing without them. And then you've got franchisees saying, well, screw it, I'll just sell it for 100 grand and go to do something else. One of the things a franchisor should do is help franchisees build a business. And that means that there has to be infrastructure in place to help them get out of being the estimator or get them out of, in a lot of cases, being the actual operator of the truck. With us, we have them hire 2 people prior to going to training to run the truck. But like eventually you continue to reinvest your money that you get from the business back into the business. And then it's an asset. And I think a lot of franchisors, emerging franchisors specifically, need to think about how they're helping franchisees get there. And if they don't have a plan for helping franchisees get to the point where they have an asset, if the franchisor doesn't have a plan, it's unlikely that the franchisee will have a plan, especially if they've never owned a business before.
Sure. And it sounds like to me that was really an influence, or it was influential on you deciding, hey, we're going to do this only as a multi-unit franchise opportunity only, right? Going back to having the right people with the right mindset. Most single unit franchise opportunities involve, as me being the franchisor, like I'm teaching people how to run a business. Whereas more of your multi-unit franchise owners are much more sophisticated owners. They know how to run a business. They may be adding this to their portfolio of companies, and maybe they're new to franchising, but they understand what it's like to be a business owner.
Yeah, and like the gentleman who's signing on Thursday, like he's a COO and a CFO of a company, right? Like so like a lot of the people who are coming in, they've ran other people's businesses on the C-suite level, or they've exited businesses on their own. Like we're just attracting like really interesting people who have the not only financial wherewithal, because every one of those people I turned down, like they had the financial wherewithal. Like it wasn't that they didn't have the money and that's why I turned them down. Like They had the money and they weren't right. So it's also just the kind of like mentality and the grit to get there.
Yeah. And I think also franchising has been going through this, we're in a new golden age of
Yeah.
franchising post COVID. And, I talk many times about how the influence of private equity is having on our industry and
Right.
professionalizing it in many ways, but, bring an enormous amount of resources. What are your thoughts on the short and long-term outcome of private equity's involvement in franchising?
What we see with a lot of emerging brands right now is the kind of race to 100 units and then the exit. And I don't believe that that is the right way that emerging franchisors should approach their business. Getting 100 units open and operating and profitable should only be something that a franchisor does if they can actually do it themselves, not like I'm going to get there and then I'm going to sell to private equity. And then the private equity money is going to actually get all these units open. That I believe is irresponsible. And so with that, you have to look at private equity's part in that, which if private equity is coming in and nabbing up these 100-unit franchise systems where 10 units are open, or 5 units are open, then they're basically buying businesses that they essentially shouldn't buy, which means they're rewarding brands for bad behavior. What I found happens is when you reward people or entities or whomever industries for bad behavior continues. And so what I like more is, where you have the capital at the beginning. So a lot of private equity companies are coming into a brand like, let's say, Rolling Suds and saying, listen, you've got a cool concept. I can bring in an operator and I'll pay him 300 grand a year as a COO and he'll franchise your business and I'll give you as much money as you need and you keep running your epoxy coatings business. That I believe is the responsible way to do it because now those franchisees, what they buy into, they actually have the capital to actually get what they support. Whereas if it's the other way, the only way franchisees are going to get what they bought is if private equity comes in and rescues the brand. And so that's saying as little about it as I possibly can.
No, this is going to be a very interesting journey, I think. See how this all,
Yeah.
we all have opinions about it. We'll see how
Yeah.
this goes. There's good and
Yeah.
bad players in anything, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
So, Aaron, I alluded to this earlier. You've done a great job, a masterful job on the personal branding side of things.
Thank you.
And I would love for you to share your thoughts on it because I think it's something that more franchise professionals need to do to elevate their brand through their own personal branding. So share with me kind of what's inspired you to be front and center in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, when you're an emerging brand, people are buying into you. Like if you have one or two stores or one or two units that are corporate run, there's not 10 to 20 years of data for franchisees to buy into. So they're essentially joining the startup. And so what I found is if I can give potential buyers or even potential employees an opportunity to get to know me before they talk to me, we're just going to have a more meaningful conversation when we connect. And I'm able to build trust at scale, not only with potential buyers, but also with the industry at large. Right. And I have a ton of beliefs on how the industry should be in 20, 30 years from now. And I think that we have a long way to go to get there. And so what I found is with the personal branding stuff I'm doing, which I'm really just getting out there and talking about the things that I'm passionate about
Mhm.
publicly. I'm now starting to attract not only franchisees that want to be part of kind of the world that I'm curating, if you will, but also potential partners, whether it's financial or potential employees that want to join the like there's just so many benefits of it. And what I found is that like over the next 5 to 10 years, probably the highest leverage thing I can do to actually achieve the goals that I have, not just for Rolling Suds, but also just franchising in general, is to focus on building an audience. That is kind of counterintuitive to what I feel like a lot of people think. Like, I need to be the operator, I need to be this. But, like, really, part of the reason I raised such a significant amount of money is like, I want to pay people who are operators to come in and be the senior vice president of my organization or be the VP of marketing for my organization and give them the opportunity to achieve their goals, which continue to rise up in that specific industry or that specific, part of their career trajectory. And so, I feel like personal branding now, especially in today's world, is more important than ever. If you just think about how many hours that people spend on social media each day,
Mhm.
and if every single time they open social media and I'm there talking about something cool about franchising or about Rolling Suds or about, business or anything in general, I'm building trust and goodwill at scale. And so we just brought content in-house. Like I have a content strategist full time. He's going to fly around with me to different conferences. I'm speaking in February at the Let's Grow conference as the keynote there. And,
Nice.
so we're just going to keep recording content and putting it out at scale.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think you've done a fabulous job of that. I hope other people kind of see that as a franchisor on the importance of that, because it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're doing a great job of building your platform as an expert in the industry. And we are going through a transition in franchising. There's a changing of the guard, and there has been a changing of the guard because the industry has, a lot of guys that are and gals that are kind of moving out, that they're in the retirement age, and we're in this next generation of franchising. And
we absolutely are. And I'm grateful to be a part of it.
That's awesome. What, Aaron, you do talk to a lot of franchise founders, of franchisors. I've seen you speak, like I said. What's been some of the biggest surprises, or what surprised you the most in franchising?
So I talk to a lot of franchise founders and a lot of franchisors that have built good businesses, but are learning how to be franchisors. And what surprised me is how little capital they think they need to do this. You'd be shocked at how many times I talk to someone that wants to franchise their business and add 6 to 12 locations a year, and they have less than $100,000 to allocate towards franchising. It is the majority of the people I speak to that want to franchise.
What do you tell them? How much they need?
It depends on their model. What I tell them is, how much is it going to cost you in infrastructure to get one unit open and profitable? Multiply that by the amount of units that you want to sell in a year. That's the amount of capital you need minimum. And then work backwards from there, and probably realistically double that number because you're going to have challenges and that unit's not going to get open in the time you think it is. But like, if you think about a four-wall, like a store, for example, like it might be 18 months before that franchisee is open and actually producing any kind of relevant royalties. For us, we have about a 9-week turnaround on launching franchisees, but like, it's at least $1 million to $2 million. Like, when I tell people who want to become franchisors that, they're like, and I'm like, I know, but like, no one's telling them that.
Right.
And
they think it's 100 and a quarter.
125, and they'll get 6 units open in a year. I'm like, I'm not trying to be offensive to the emerging franchisor, because how could they know, right? Like, they've never done this business before.
Right.
How could they know?
Right. Yeah. It's, you always hope when you hear on the low end, that's what it takes, but that's might be what it takes just to get your franchise company open, not to actually sustain itself. Right.
Right. Sustaining itself depends upon how much cash you're keeping from franchise fees.
Yeah.
Which changes the number that you need to have in the bank even more. And so before I launched Rolling Suds, I modeled out what it looks like till the end of 2028. If I sell a certain number of units and have a certain amount of G&A, and franchisees open with this amount of revenue, and what their growth rate is. Like, I did all that before I decided to actually franchise Rolling Suds. And I believe that anyone who wants to become a franchisor needs to do that. And if they don't do that, they shouldn't become a franchisor yet.
Since you are the guy that's in franchise development at Rolling Suds, what advice do you give to people who are interested in joining the brand?
The advice I would give for people who want to join Rolling Suds is come in, execute on the model. You're paying us a royalty and an upfront cost that's significant. Give you the playbook. I always say, like, educate before you innovate. I'm so excited that there's going to be franchisees who have a ton of ideas on what to do to grow their business, but do the thing you paid us for first, which is execute on the model. Then let's innovate. And then let's implement that across the rest of the system. And what I've found, the major difference between like successful franchisees and like franchisees that struggle, is their willingness to execute on the model that they paid for, which seems counterintuitive, honestly. But like, franchising is not necessarily for everyone, right? If you want to build the model, don't franchise, don't become a franchisee.
Yeah, absolutely. Do some of your franchisees, that since they're multi-unit owners, do they own multi-brands as well?
Some of them, yes. Like, I just got off the phone with someone who's a CertaPro franchisee. And a lot of people they either own existing brands or they're about to exit an existing brand and want to roll that capital into a new venture. And Rolling Suds becomes that.
Nice. Hey, Aaron, if someone's interested in learning more about the franchise opportunity, where can they get more info?
Yeah, rollingsudsfranchise.com. You can submit requests for information. Or if you just want free content on franchising, you could follow me on Instagram at Aaron P, as in Timothy, Harper, Harper. Twitter is Rolling Suds CEO. And then if you just type in Aaron Harper, Rolling Suds, LinkedIn, I'm pretty active, as I know you see. And I just put out free content for franchisees and franchisors.
Nice. All right, Aaron. Well, I always finish with a tip jar. Since the franchise community is so generous with info, you have been awesome, giving so many best practices. If I was that entrepreneur looking to franchise my concept, what piece of advice would you give me?
You need both the intellectual capital on how to franchise a business, and you need the actual capital, which is the amount of money that you need to actually franchise a business. I wouldn't franchise unless you have a significant amount of both of those things.
Awesome. Aaron, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for
Great
having
seeing
me
you again. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.